Want to go ahead and say hello and good evening to everybody. It's 8 o'clock here on the East Coast where I'm at. Go ahead and get started here just in a couple minutes. And we'll go ahead and just review a little bit. Like I said, this is going to be about a 30 to 45-minute presentation. I'm getting the hang of this with every single one. So hopefully it'll be a little on the smoother side. I always want to give you guys that experience. So this is going to be the second installment of the ASC's kind of a colloquium series on exercise and health science. Basically, what happened was Melissa and I, a few months ago, came up with this idea to do kind of a chronologically based colloquium series where we kind of build on a couple of basic exercise and health science principles and concepts and disciplines. So I wanted to go ahead and just kind of develop three different kinds of lines of focus or foci. And this first line is all about introducing some basic concepts of exercise and fitness. And then the idea here is from that point, we progress on to some nutrition. And then I believe we finish off with some psychology. So this is something that obviously I'm very passionate about as a former athlete. My wife, who's also a professor, does some nutrition. So we kind of collaborate on some of this right here. And I wanted to go ahead and show you guys this first screen that you should be seeing right now. We had a presentation, I believe it was about maybe 2 weeks ago, and a little more than that probably. And at that time, we kind of talked more about just some basic psychology of getting into health and fitness endeavors, and specifically more fitness endeavors. So this is just kind of a synopsis of what I talked about last time. And I want you guys just go ahead and let this kind of wash over you here just a little bit. So basically, I had three different kind of areas that I focused on. Area number one was I talked about some of the common barriers that people use, not only for New Year's resolutions, obviously, but just kind of beginning fitness programs. And these are just barriers to adopting a program and the consistency of sticking with a program. And you can see the four of them right there. They range from lack of time to lack of motivation, just to limitations within the person and their functioning and their capacity. And then a big one is lack of self-confidence. So I kind of touched on those a little bit. And then I talked about some specific strategies to increase the adoption and maintenance of exercise behaviors. And you can see those right there. And I'm not going to necessarily read them all. Setting realistic SMART goals, keeping a journals. Those are things I'm going to talk about in the future a little bit more specifically. And again, the way that this was kind of conceptualized was we're just kind of building on this. And I think last time we had about 10 to 15 people there. So I think that was a fairly decent turnout. To end the last session, we just talked specifically about some basic psychological and behavior change techniques called behavioral shaping, cueing, and journaling. And I talked about that really quickly and kind of gave some examples of that. And so if you weren't at the last one, that's pretty much kind of what we had going on. I'm just going to go ahead and admit a couple more people here. But what I want to talk about this time is I want to talk about a very specific type of exercise planning, and it's called periodization. All right, I'll go ahead and say that word maybe this time without stuttering. Periodization. And this is a really popular kind of exercise principle or paradigm that athletes use to kind of challenge their bodies and their minds to grow over a period of time without stagnating. So what I wanted to do with this presentation is I want to talk about some of the basic terminology, the basic concepts of periodization. It's a fitness principle that at some level, it's common sense. At some level, it's a little bit more on the scientific side. So I'm going to try to split the difference here and talk a little bit from the common sense and the scientific side. And hopefully we can kind of catch on board with kind of what I'm doing. So here's just some questions to consider as we get started here. And, everybody has different health and fitness motives. All right. So this particular presentation is going to be more geared for muscle strength, muscle power, muscle fitness. So more on the anaerobic side of fitness. But then in later presentations, I'm going to focus more on the cardiovascular or aerobic side of fitness. So if we're interested maybe more in the cardiovascular side, I don't want to alienate those people because we will do a couple presentations on that as well. I myself was very much and still am a strength training athlete. I know we have a couple others in our program in our department. So, we kind of have this as a vocation and avocation. So these are just, have we had, any kind of inkling or any kind of desire to begin that kind of program? And if so, what's kept people from doing it, right? Or in this case, what kept you from doing so? And the answers maybe typically would be, well, lack of knowledge, lack of time, lack of kind of knowing how to script a program that's beneficial. And that kind of leads me to my third point right here of, how comfortable are you in designing your own personal exercise program? And I'm not just necessarily talking about going to YouTube and looking at some fitness influencer and kind of what they're doing and then kind of shape that behavior yourself. I'm talking more about developing a kind of a tried and true way of adapting to a fitness program. So that's just kind of some words of thought and some nuggets of thought that I always like to begin my presentations with. So here's our objectives for tonight. It's going to be a little on the shorter side of the presentation because, as I would tell my classes in the university, when I have information that is kind of novel to people and they're polysyllabic words that do quite well on a Scrabble board, but necessarily they haven't really heard these terms before, what I'd like to do is give people kind of chunks of this in smaller, more digestible ways. Okay, so I want to talk about the concept and the philosophy of exercise periodization, what it's all about. It's basically an Eastern European kind of old school design of fitness and health and exercise. It's been adapted here in the Westernized culture and in the United States. It's been adapted a couple different times to kind of reflect different motives. Explore some of the terminology and the structure with it. And then I always close my presentation with some strategies and what we call best practices. I think most of us in here are academicians, so we're well aware of this concept of best practices. And, those are just kind of tried and true concepts of different things that we can do. So periodization, let me go ahead and flip this. What periodization is, and the way I tell this to my students is, it's a type of exercise and sport training where you seek to develop different periods, right? You seek to develop different periods of time, and within these different periods of time, you have different specific training goals, okay? So a period of time could be a week, a period of time can be a month, a period of time can be a year. And we're going to talk about the nomenclature or how those things are named, and for nomenclature and for naming. All right, so we're going to talk about how you name these periods, but periodization is all about kind of breaking fitness and breaking exercise down into manageable periods of time. And then within these periods of time, you have different foci, right? You have different focus of what aspect of your fitness you're going to train for. Okay, and I'm going to talk about some of the parameters there, like intensity and volume. But the idea here with periodization is it can obviously decrease the risk of overtraining and injury. And I want to kind of capitalize and bold the word overtraining. This is one of I think the biggest psychological and physiologic barriers that athletes have is they get to a point of overtraining. And overtraining, quite honestly, has been kind of looked at academically as something that's more physiologically based at the muscular level and maybe the connective tissue level. But there's a huge psychological association and a huge psychological impact of overtraining. Everything from stagnation to just loss of focus, loss of passion. So periodization can help with that concept because periodization is all about changing these different parameters. And when you change the parameters and you train within different periods for different things, it keeps your mind engaged, it keeps your body engaged, and you allow your body time to rest by varying these different kinds of variables, if that makes sense to you guys. Okay. Periodization can also help maximize strength, speed, and endurance. And again, training burnout, overtraining, they're kind of the same basic things. So what I loved about periodization back in the day as an amateur bodybuilder in Southern California was if I stuck with the same training routine, then I just pretty much wasn't motivated to continue to do it. All right. I needed a challenge. And so periodization kind of fit the bill for me because I was able to challenge my body in a stepwise manner, but I was also able to allow my body to recover. I'm just reading the text that came on here from Catherine. Yeah, and I think Melissa is also on here as well, and she can kind of help with the cataloging of this presentation. So, thanks for that question. All right. So these are just kind of some points. I've kind of danced around these just a little bit in terms of kind of what I'm looking at here. Let me go back here. So the idea of periodization, it's based on this principle of progression. All right. And the whole principle of progression, this basically says you need to change specific variables to allow your body to not adapt. Okay. When our bodies are economical kind of machines, right? Our bodies actually like the path of least resistance. Our metabolism, our homeostasis, our body likes to maintain its functioning within very narrow parameters. And one of the ways our body does that physiologically is it helps there's different processes in the body that allows our body to function within certain kinds of norms, certain kinds of parameters. And so our body will always seek to adjust those parameters. And our muscles are the same way. If we constantly train them within a very specified narrow form of parameter, then our muscles adapt to that. Our brains and our nerves and our muscle impulse firing patterns, they adapt to kind of a consistent stimulus. And when our muscles adapt to that consistent stimulus, they don't grow. All right. So muscles have to grow based on this principle of progression where we're constantly increasing the demands that we put on our muscles. Okay. And there's different sets of demands that we can put on them. But the idea is to put these increased demands on the muscles. That's the principle of progression. But the idea is if we just continue to do that, we're going to overtrain. So we need to build in what this graph shows you here is something called a planned recovery. All right. So we are increasing these parameters. We're constantly making gains with our fitness. But if we continue without these planned recovery periods, all right, then we're going to stagnate and we're going to overtrain. So that principle of progression basically states, as I've said right here, that we have to change and increase certain parameters that I'm going to talk about in this presentation, or else our body adapts to that. And by that process of adaptation, it doesn't grow. Okay. And I'm talking in more the anaerobic realm. I'm talking about the muscle fitness, muscle strength, muscle power realm. Okay. But it also works in anaerobic realms as well. Okay. So that third bullet right there is something I've kind of already talked about. I've just kind of hit on these three different points, kind of in the same breath here. But again, the idea of progression is we need to progress through time and through space by challenging our bodies. Okay. Challenging our muscular system, challenging our nervous system. If we don't do that and we allow the body to stagnate and set its parameters for how it's going to function, we don't grow, if that makes sense to you guys. Okay, so what are some of these basic terms associated with periodization? Now, I will confess to you guys, I'll just get on my little pulpit here and tell you guys when I first read about periodization, this was some of the original works that came from the Eastern Bloc countries like the Soviet Union. It seemed kind of daunting, because there's a lot of very specific terminology associated with periodization. And it seemed like, okay, I just need something kind of simple. I need something that will challenge me, that will help my muscles grow. But man, this is really, really sciencey. All these different terms and concepts are kind of sciencey. And I wasn't at that time. I was kind of younger and kind of dumber. And I just didn't want to do that kind of work. But I've since learned that by understanding some of these concepts and understanding what some of these terms represent, it makes things a lot easier. So periodization is about periods of time, as I said previously. Okay, these periods of time are called cycles. Okay, like bicycle, unicycle, tricycle, they're cycles. Let me go ahead and just kind of check the chat here. Yeah, we're talking more logistically. All right. So these different cycles here, these are our basic periods of time, and they're called a macro, meso, and microcycle. So those are the three basic terms associated with periodization. Macro means large, like a macrophage. It's an immunological cell. Meso means middle, and micro means small, like microscope. All right. So these different cycles, these different periodization cycles involve large amounts of time, a moderate amount of time, and small amounts of time. Okay, those are the cycles: large, medium, small. Okay, and the next three bullet points on this screen kind of help you illustrate those concepts. So a macrocycle can be anywhere from months to a year. Now, again, I'll just kind of go on some of the basic things that I did back in my bodybuilding day. I would maybe compete once a year. I'd throw on the old mankini and I would kind of step on stage all oiled up and I would compete 1 year. And so in between my competitions, I had about 11 months. Okay. When I started training, that 11-month period of time between competition A and competition B was my macro cycle. Okay. If you are a professional football player, then a macro cycle would be from when your team went out in the playoffs until the start of spring training the following year. If you're kind of catching my drift here. So it's the end of one performance setting to the beginning of the next performance setting. So that's called a macro cycle. All right. So that's the first term that you need to kind of understand as you start to think about how do you design a fitness program is what is your macro cycle? What are you actually training for? Maybe you don't have a specific performance outcome, but so a macro cycle could just be a half a year or a year. All right. So it can just be a larger period of time. And there's some examples right there. Mesocycle is, again, more on the middle side. So I like to look at mesocycles as basically the weeks. If macro, large, is months, meso, weeks, is more of the middle. Okay. So it just kind of depends. So here, most of the research that I found is a mesocycle usually lasts for a certain period of weeks. All right. So here is going to be kind of an analogy that we can use. All right. And I would say this to my students. Mesocycle A plus mesocycle B plus mesocycle Z, if you combine all those like a train and you put them together, that's going to be your macrocycle. So a macrocycle is made up of mesocycles, kind of like, again, train cars that are attached together. Microcycle, micro small, another word for that is the short period of time. So a microcycle can either be a week or it can be just a specific workout. All right. So I'm going to show you guys a graph here just real quick on this page. Let me go ahead and fling myself over to it. And this is just more of a visualization. All right. So in terms of how I would kind of look at this, I would say, well, okay, if I don't know if you guys can see my little cursor moving around on the screen, but if I go to the left side of my macrocycle, that would be the end of, let's say, the football season. All right. And then over here on the right side of the macrocycle, that would be the beginning of OTAs, all right, training workouts off season in the summer around this time of the year. Okay, so that macro cycle in between my last performance on the football field and the first day of spring training, that's called my macro cycle. Right down underneath that, I have all the specific months between those time frames. Those are called my mesocycles. So in this particular case, if the season ended in February, because our team kind of stunk, and it started again in September, right? Then I'm going to have 5 or 6 different mesocycles, if that makes sense to you. Okay, then we go down into the week levels. Those are my micros. So I have 4 microcycles per month, right? 4 weeks per month. So the idea is, okay, with periodization, you need to define your macrocycle. What is that period of time that you're trying to train for? How long is that? Then what you do is you say, okay, I can't just design a program for 6 months. That seems kind of overwhelming. So now let me break it down into individual months. So within that mesocycle, what do I want to train for? Oh, I want to train for muscle strength. Okay, well, how about the next mesocycle? Oh, I want to train for muscle power. Oh, and then how about the next mesocycle? Oh, I want to train for muscle endurance, if you're following me there. Okay, so I have a general idea of what I want to do in these particular months. Then I nerd out even further. And I say, okay, there's 4 weeks in a month. So what do I want to focus on for those individual weeks to support my desire to have muscle power and muscle strength gains? All right. And then I'm going to formulate my workout in those particular ways a certain way. Okay. Then you go way down here underneath the microcycle and you have individual training days. So what this is showing you here, and you can count the hashes here, is you have 4 workouts per week. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit more about exercise prescription in later presentations. But if I want to go ahead and I want to work out 4 different times in that particular week, which is a recommendation for muscle training, muscle strength training, those are going to be my workout days. So every single week, I have 4 workout days. And that's what that graph is showing you. So let me go ahead and review. This is kind of an interesting concept that a lot of students have a hard time figuring out, right? So I'm just trying to kind of dissect this the best I can. And you guys can let me know if you think I'm doing a decent job at this. The macro cycle, macro large, that's that performance period of time from the end of one thing to the beginning of another thing. All right. Your mesocycles are going to be the months like train cars that come together, which form the macrocycle. And for each one of those months, you have 4 different weeks. Okay. And then within each of those weeks, you have days. So that's kind of the concept of what a periodization cycle is. And again, most people kind of they see that and they get kind of overwhelmed and they say, okay, I get that, Dr. Sean, but okay, what's the payout of that? How do I go about thinking about how I want to focus on my macrocycle? What do I want to train for? All right. And then my mesos, oh, what do I want to do with my mesos? How do I want to train my body? So this is what we're going to kind of go with in terms of a little further illustration of periodization. Let me go ahead and check the chat real quick. Okay, we're talking about just different kinds of options for students here. So let me go ahead and flip this just a little bit. Hopefully you guys are kind of catching on here. All right, so these are the different things that we can periodize. If we understand the basic chronology of periodization, as in it's broken down into 3 cycles, then you say, okay, I get that, it makes sense to me, but now how do I change certain parameters to try to put an exercise program together? So I've come up with 5 or 6 basic ones, and these are things that you can periodize. If you're kind of catching the words I'm saying, you can periodize them. You can change them over periods of time. And I'll talk about some of these variables when I get into specifics of strength training and aerobic training. We'll talk about some of this, but you can see some of the examples that I have here. So one of the main variables, the main things that we can periodize is called volume. And volume basically is the amount of training. Again, this presentation is more on the strength training side. So if I want to calculate and change my volume of training, all that refers to is at some level, I want to calculate how much weight I actually lift per session or per exercise. Okay, so this is where journaling comes in, and this is where other types of behaviors come in, so you can adequately chart these different things. All right, so one of the things, and I didn't want to share it tonight because I couldn't dig out of my bookshelf, but I still have a couple of the journals that I kept as a college athlete, and I had a kind of a periodization journal. And I just kind of wrote down the different cycles. I identified my goals, my performance goals for the off season. Oh, I want to gain 20 pounds of muscle. I want to increase my 40-yard dash time. And I just had different performance goals. Okay. But one of the variables that I would constantly seek to change within these periods is volume. So I wanted to change the amount of weight I lifted. I wouldn't just try to lift more every single month, right? I wouldn't just try to increase my volume all the time, because as I said previously, if I do nothing but increase my volume every single month, at some point, my body is going to burn out, my psyche is going to burn out, I'm going to be more prone to connective tissue injury or muscular injury, right? I'm just going to reach kind of what we call progressive overload. And I'm just going to go past that, and my body's going to kind of basically fail to thrive. So volume of training is something that you can periodize. It's something that you can change based on the cycle that you're talking about. Okay. And again, in later presentations, I'll talk more specifically about that. The frequency of training, that's all just about the number of times that you engage in that particular exercise or in that particular form of exercise. So here it's the number of times that you run or jog, or the number of times per week that you engage in strength training. Right? So frequency is just how often. So volume is how much. Frequency is how often. Okay. Then you have something called intensity. So what I want you to see here is with strength training, there's this concept that most physiologists, biomechanists, and exercise scientists know, and it's called the 1 repetition maximum. It's down there in the 3rd bullet point. So whenever we try to design a fitness program that is based on muscle strength improvements, and we do this more in a clinical way, one of the things that we want to see for these different kind of basic multi-joint exercises is we want to see how much weight a person can push in 1 repetition, 1 time. Okay. 1 repetition is 1 time. So the idea is how much weight can you lift with that particular muscle for 1 repetition, 1 time. Okay. That's going to be your 1 repetition max, the amount of weight you can lift with 1 repetition of 1 RM, if you've never heard that term before. Okay. And exercise physiologists and sport biomechanists, we kind of use that as kind of a starting point. So your intensity, let's say I can do something called a bench press, and I'm not going to just necessarily assume that everybody knows what a bench press is. We'll kind of have a later presentation too. But basically, it's a multi-joint exercise for the upper body. It's one of the core exercises that you can do to build muscle strength, muscle size, right? Hypertrophy. So the idea here is within a safe clinical setting, I'm going to figure out how much weight I can bench press one time. Maybe it's 100 pounds, maybe it's 300 pounds. Whatever it is, that's my one repetition maximum. So when I'm trying to periodize muscle intensity, I'm going to work out at a percentage of that one repetition maximum, if that makes sense to you guys. So for a specific, let's say, mesocycle or specific months, I'm going to do, let's say, upper body training at 50% of my 1 RM. All right. So what that means is for the exercises that I'm going to do that work my upper body, I'm going to calculate my 1 RM for those different movements, whether it's a bicep curl or a chest press or a shoulder press. I'm going to calculate how much weight I can do one time. And then for that month, I'm going to do half that amount of weight. That's called 50% of your 1 RM, if you're following me there. So volume is the total amount lifted. And all you do there is you do some basic math of how much weight you lifted for how many sets for how many reps. I'll talk about that in future future presentations. Frequency is just how many times you do that particular thing over a certain cycle. And intensity is what's the percentage of weight that you're lifting as compared to how much you can maximally lift, if that makes sense to you guys. So those three, volume, frequency, intensity. I can change all three of these variables throughout the different cycles that I talked about previously. And I'll show you some examples of that at the end of this presentation. And that's how you start to think about periodization. All right, here's just a couple more I want to go ahead and go to. And these are what we call specificity and session, and of course, recovery and rest. So specificity of training, that is all about what specific types of things are we doing, specific types of lifts, all right? Specific types of swimming training things that we're doing, specific types of bike riding we're doing. My wife and I have a gym down in one of our garages, and we have some ergometers that are stationary, all right? And we also have bikes that we ride around on streets. Both of those are examples of bike riding, bicycle riding, all right? But they're very specific types of bicycle riding, if you're kind of catching me there. There's stationary ergometry or stationary bicycle riding. That's a very specific type. And then taking a bicycle out onto a street or through a park would be another specific type of training. So my bad. Specificity is all about the specific exercise behavior that you're doing. A session is your individual workout. All right. So, this morning we went down to our gym and I did a combination of martial arts and upper body training and lower body training. I did it for about 1 hour and 5 minutes. That's my session. That's my individual workout. And then recovery and rest, again, here, we're allowing our body to heal and rebuild. Okay. A lot of my training is in the psychology realm. So I'm going to say recovery and rest is physiologically needed. This is something that our muscles and our connective tissues need to continue to adapt and progress. But equally important, we need to have mental recovery and mental rest, okay, to keep our desire, to keep our focus, to keep our energy, our psychic energy going strong. And again, periodization is a kind of program that allows that to happen. How? Because I said previously, we build in active rest. We build in rest and recovery into that program. So those different kinds of 6 variables right there, what you would kind of walk away from this presentation knowing here is that these are the specific types of things that you can periodize. These are the specific types of variables that you can kind of look at and you can say, I can change these over time. Right, here's just some benefits of periodized training. I don't necessarily want to read every single word on this, but I'm one of these characters that when I put a presentation together, I kind of bold certain words, right? I found that it calls my students' attention to certain things over time academically. So, I can kind of look at this and say, well, our 3 benefits that we can see here is we're avoiding plateaus, okay? By constantly changing the stimuli that we're asking our brain and our body to go through, all right? We avoid these homeostatic, what I said, plateaus where our body can just invest minimal amounts of energy to achieve a certain biomechanical action. Bodies wanted that. All right. So, one of the things I heard way back in the day was our bodies are basically lazy. If they could get away with it, they would basically be lazy. Okay. They wouldn't grow. We wouldn't have good health, but our bodies basically want to function within very normal parameters. So periodization helps the process of avoiding plateaus. Okay. What they also do is periodization helps build very specific aspects of fitness, like muscle strength, muscle power, muscle speed. Okay. And periodization allows you to get to those aspects and develop them quicker and more effectively. And then the last one here is periodization can help you avoid injury. Again, how does it do that? Because you're constantly changing these different variables. You're constantly changing volume. You're constantly changing intensity. You're constantly changing rest and recovery. Okay. So you're keeping everything fresh. Our bodies like fresh. Our minds like fresh. Our bodies like new things to kind of work through the limits of. Our brains like new things to learn, new things to challenge us. Okay. So those are some of the benefits. Here is just kind of an example of a basic kind of breakdown of the cycles. Okay. These different periods in periodization. So as you look at this graph right here, what I want you to kind of think about is, okay, I see 4 different boxes right there. All right. And we're not going to necessarily read the y-axis right now, but I see 4 different periods. I want you to think of these periods as the mesocycles. So we have 4 different mesocycles in this one macrocycle. If you're understanding these terms, we're coming a long way. Okay. So this is one big macrocycle. And there's 4 periods or 4 mesocycles. And then within each of these periods, we're going to break those down into microcycles. So what I want you to see here is that for every single mesocycle, we have different sets of goals. These different lines are not labeled, but what I want you to see here is these are like 3 examples of some of those barriers or some of those variables that we can change. So the top kind of arrow that we can kind of get to, again, I'm going to have Jenny or Melissa kind of give me a post hoc critique here. And I don't know if you guys are seeing my cursor right here. I'm kind of hoping you are, but I'm not quite sure. But this top line where my cursor is right now, this might be my volume line. All right. So I'm constantly increasing volume within my first mesocycle and a half. All right. But then I'm allowing my volume to actually kind of go down now. The amount of weight that I'm lifting, I want to actually decrease that within this third mesocycle. Okay. I want to give my body a chance to recover. I want to give my muscles a chance to recover. But after they've had this process of recovery right here, I want to build back up. Same thing here on the second line. We'll call this intensity. I'm going to begin this, let's say in my second mesocycle, I'm going to increase my intensity for a certain period of time, but then I'm going to go ahead and like the first one, I'm going to level out and I'm going to reduce that. Okay. Now the last line right here, we'll call this duration, or we'll call this frequency actually. So this mesocycle, I'm going to increase the frequency with which I exercise to a point where it levels off. And then guess what happens? At this point, you're not going to see it because we have to go to a 5th mesocycle, but it's going to start to go down. So what I want you to see in this graphic right here is I want you to be able to look at that and say, okay, Dr. Sean, I realize we are looking at a macrocycle that is made up of 4 mesocycles, 4 different periods. This is why we call it periodization. It's got 4 periods. Within each one of those periods, I have something called microcycles. And within each of those microcycles, we have certain ways that we're going to train. But the idea is to build on certain variables, but then back off of them while simultaneously maybe building on other variables. Okay, so this is, again, I want you to think of this as kind of a, how would I look at this? So I don't know, some of the people I work with know I grew up in Southern California and I used to surf a little bit. And the idea was as waves grow, they get bigger, okay, to a point when the shoreline decreases, the waves grow and they get bigger. But then at some point, they kind of run out of shoreline to continue the growth. And so the waves actually crash, right? So I want you to kind of think of the waves of an ocean, how it grows and gets bigger and bigger over time. And then at some point, the wave kind of crashes and it kind of turns into not a wave anymore. And it laps up on the sand and we kind of walk through the sand and we kind of look at that and we ooh and ah. So periodization is kind of like the same thing. We're going to take a variable, it's going to grow over time. But what we're going to do at some point in time, that variable has to diminish. That variable has to get smaller. Okay, so that's what periodization is all about. It's about taking these variables, changing them over time, and then allowing them to increase like a wave, but then decrease over a period of time. Right, we're getting there. Hopefully you guys are kind of getting out of this. But what I have here, I'm not going to belabor these different slides too much. You guys will have access to this. But basically what I wanted to do is I wanted to break the next couple slides down into some things that we can consider for all the different kinds of cycles. So again, the macro cycle, that's the longest phase of our training. Okay, so whatever our macro cycle as defined at. So if I have a client, let's say, that wants to lose, I don't know, 40 pounds of body fat, and they'd like to lose it in a year, that year is going to be my macro cycle. Okay, so that period of time that they develop through their SMART goals is going to be their macro cycle. Within that macro cycle, there's 5 different variables that you can periodize. All right, you can change your training objectives, what it is that you want to recover. You can assess your current fitness level. All right, and this is for competitive athletes. The third bullet point is what's their schedule for that particular macro cycle. How many competitions do they have? How many games do they have? How many practices do they have? Okay, what's their available training time? So we have to kind of look at how much time do we have to actually train. And again, we're all constrained by work, we're all constrained by family. So we have to kind of look at the training time that we have to work with. And then the last one is recovering time. So if we're trying to identify our macro cycle, we have to identify these 5 different variables. What is it that I want to accomplish? Oh, I want to lose some body fat. What's my current fitness level? Well, cardiovascularly, here's my fitness level. Aerobically, anaerobically, here's my fitness level. Flexibility wise, there's my fitness level. Okay, so we're evaluating that. It's like a baseline. Okay, what's our competition schedule? I don't really have any competitions, Dr. Sean, but I can break this down into different phases. How much training time can we allocate? Is it an hour a day? Okay, is it a couple hours a day? What's our recovery time? How much recovery do we need? Everybody is different. Okay, so once we've identified those different variables, we can put all those together and we can say these are our macro cycle objectives right here. Here's some mesocycle stuff. Again, mesocycle, I want you to think of that as the months. So I want you to notice there's something very specific here, and that's a second bullet point. These variables are the same exact thing as the macro cycle. Okay, these mesocycle variables are the same thing. So what does that mean? That means you identify them for your macro cycle, but then every single month during that macro cycle, those mesocycles, we're going to constantly go back and we're going to recheck. We're going to go back and look at our training objectives. Oh, my objective this month was to lose 5 pounds of body fat. Okay, how about the next month? Well, now my objective is, because I'm feeling pretty good about myself, I've established a repetitive and a progressive and an effective exercise program, and I want to push it to 10 pounds this month. What's our current fitness levels? How do we evaluate that? I'll talk about that in future presentations. Do we have any competitions within that month? What's our available training time in that month? What's our recovery time? So these are specific variables. Again, you can look at them on the large kind of scope of the macro cycle, but you can also reevaluate them every single month to see what's changed, what needs to change. But I want you to kind of see where I'm going here with periodization is you're constantly reevaluating over cycles. Okay. Now, once I get that, we come down to our last cycle planning, and that's called the microcycle. So with microcycle, again, we're looking at the same thing there. We are looking at our objectives, our fitness level, our competitions, if we have any, our training time, and our recovering time. So basically, one of the things I'm going to talk about in future presentations is I'm going to show you guys basically a template. It's a periodization template. It's going to be broken down into these different macrocycle, mesocycles, microcycles. And we're going to go through as a cohort, as a class, and we're going to look at how we can fill in these different boxes and how we can start to develop the periodized phase of training. So these are some of the things that we're going to identify every large amounts of time, every month, every week. Okay. And that's what the process of journaling is all about. It's about looking at what needs to change within that period of time. How do we keep it fresh? How do we stimulate our bodies? How do we stimulate our brains to support increased progression of exercise and health and fitness while allowing rest and recovery? Okay. but we're constantly kind of fine tuning and we're constantly checking. We're saying, hey, this is working okay. This isn't working so much here. So let me kind of go ahead and refine a little bit over here. Let me tweak a little bit more. If you're kind of catching me there. All right. So this is just some of the things that we ask ourselves for these different. Now, here's the one last illustration I want to go ahead and show you guys. And you kind of look at this right here and you say, oh my goodness, what is this? Okay. This is another way to illustrate a periodized exercise program. So let's go ahead and look at this together just real quick as a kind of a group. So on the X axis down there, the horizontal axis, you have these different periods. Guess what those are? Those are mesocycles. We have 4 mesocycles right there. Okay. On the Y, or the vertical axis, what you're going to have is you're going to have on the bottom, you're going to have low, and on the top, you're going to have high. All right. Or you're going to have minimal to maximal. You're going to have something on the low end of the scale, and you're going to have something on the high end of the scale. All right, let me go ahead and just check the chat here just real quick. All right, looks like we're kind of getting that going. All right, so what I want to show you here is I want you to basically kind of flow with this whole concept of what's happening within this macrocycle. Look at the volume during the preparatory period. Don't worry about the names. All right. This particular presentation is about, this isn't so much about the names of these different periods. I want you to just recognize that you're looking at a complete macrocycle that consists of 4 mesocycles. If you guys are with me there, thumbs up, doing a good job. Okay, 4 mesos, 1 macro. So now look at volume. During mesocycle 1, I'm exercising. So as I learn how to calculate my exercise volume for that month, I'm going to keep my volume high. I'm going to keep the total amount of weight I lift, the quantity of weight I lift, high. But look at what volume does over the corresponding mesocycles. Hopefully you're understanding the words as they're rolling out of my head. I mean, it is, 7:41 here Eastern Standard Time, so I think I'm still kind of fresh. But the idea is, okay, volume starts high, but then over the mesocycles, it goes lower. But guess what's going higher? Intensity starts moderately, and then it builds over the following mesocycles, and then it drops off. Okay, and then you have that third hash line down below that starts on the lower side. That's called technique. We'll get to that later on in kind of the anaerobic kind of exercise design presentation I'm planning for you guys. Okay, but basically here, we're kind of refining our technique and we're doing exercises in a very specific way. All right. So within this first mesocycle, our technique, our intensity of how we do the exercise is on the lower side. But then over the following mesocycles, it increases as well. So this is what I want you to see with periodization, guys. I want you to see that what this is a way to periodize or change through periods of time different exercise variables. And the idea is we don't want just a bunch of straight lines right there. Why? Because if we have a bunch of straight lines, our bodies do a yawn. And, oh, I don't want to grow today. I don't want to increase my muscle endurance. I don't want to increase my muscle strength. I don't want to increase my muscle power. You're not stressing me out enough. You're not asking more of me enough. So the idea here is, again, we want to progress through time. That's the principle of progression. And how we do that is we change these different variables over time. We never allow our mind and our bodies to kind of adapt to one type of workload. We're constantly refreshing our workload, okay? And that keeps our brains engaged, that keeps our muscles engaged. So this is kind of just one last illustration of periodization. And this is what you would chart. We're going to work on this later on in a more, I would say, a little bit more of a complex presentation for those interested, is we're going to learn how to maybe put these lines together and what it looks like to change your volume. How specifically can you do that? What does it look like to change your intensity? How can you do that? Okay, I want to go ahead and close the presentation down today with just kind of some basics of how you could periodize based on different desires that people have for developing muscle fitness. So this first phase here, this is just some recommendations I put together for if you have an interest in increasing your muscle strength and your muscle endurance. Okay, I'm not going to read all these words right here, but what I would want to call your attention to is kind of the middle 3 bullet points. And what do you see there? You see 3 periodization variables: duration, volume, intensity. Okay, So within, let's say, this cycle right here, let's call this a mesocycle because we're talking about 3 to 4 weeks. That sounds like a mesocycle, right? A macrocycle would be lots of weeks. But here we're talking about 3 to 4. That sounds like a month to me. That looks like a mesocycle. So within this mesocycle, where I'm focusing, my training objectives are to develop muscle strength and muscle endurance. How would that look? Well, my duration, that phase is going to consist of 3 or 4 weeks. That mesocycle is going to consist of 3 or 4 weeks. Then I'm going to reevaluate. What are my volumes going to be? Well, during those 3 to 4 weeks, I'm going to do 3 sets at a certain amount of repetitions. If you don't know sets and reps and what a set is and what a repetition is, I'm going to talk about that, I believe. And Melissa, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm going to talk about that in our next presentation, which is more specific to anaerobic training, strength training, and just kind of how to develop that program specifically. All right. So if you're kind of looking at the word sets and reps and you're thinking, hey, man, I have no idea. All right. Kind of put that on the back burner. And I would encourage you to maybe go to the next presentation when we talk about that more specifically. But basically, a repetition is one muscle exertion. Right. So if I'm doing a bench press or an upper body strength training exercise from my chest, if I push 1 time, that's 1 repetition. All right. If I push 15 times, that's 15 repetitions. Okay. So for this particular foundational periodized approach, I'm going to do 3 sets at 12 to 15 repetitions. What that means is I'm going to do 15 reps 1 time. I'm going to rest 30 to 90 seconds. All right. Then I'm going to do 15 more. I'm going to rest 30 to 90 seconds. Now do 15 more. 3 sets and intensity. That's my 3rd periodized. I roll with 30 or 40 pounds for that particular month. All right. It's a small percentage of my 1 RM. I want you to see that. Okay, let me go ahead and go with a couple more. If our goal is to increase muscle hypertrophy, hyper above normal trophy development, increased muscle size, here's how we can periodize that. You could read the first 2 bullet points. I'm going to focus on duration, volume, intensity. So here our mesocycle is 4 weeks. Here our volume, look at the reps. They've dropped down a little bit. Okay, we'll talk about why that is in a future presentation. But now we're not doing 15 reps anymore. We're backing off that a little bit, right? We're doing less of them and we're resting maybe a little less than before. But now look what our intensity is doing. Now our intensity is actually going up. Now our weights, the amount of weight that we're lifting is starting to increase. Okay. Reps are going down, weight is going up, rest is going down. You see how these things are kind of changing. So with muscle hypertrophy for that mesocycle, that's how I would script my exercise program for muscle strength and muscle power. Okay. And then the last one I have for you guys, we'll actually have one more after this. For muscle strength, okay, you can read the first 2 bullet points. Okay. But here our periodization variables are 4 weeks still. That's still our mesocycle. But now look at the repetitions. Okay. Now they went from 15 down to 12, down to 4 to 8. Whoa, like half, right? But there's a caveat with that. If we're dropping the amount of times that we're doing that particular exercise and we're resting longer, 90 seconds to 2 minutes, we're allowing more rest in between sets. Guess what we're doing here? If one thing is going down, according to periodization, the other thing has to go up. So now our exercise intensity is getting higher, right? What that means is we're lifting more weight per exercise per set. So I want you to kind of see what's going on here. The first phase, we're not lifting a lot of weight. We're not resting a lot, but we're doing it more often, right? In our first mesocycle. Our second mesocycle, we're actually lifting a little bit more weight. We're actually resting a little bit more, and it's still lasting 4 weeks. Okay, so I want you to see how the numbers are changing. All right, last one is muscle power. Then we'll go ahead and put a bow on this bad boy. With muscle power, we're not necessarily looking at how effectively our muscles metabolize substrate for muscle endurance. We're not looking at how swollen, how jacked up we are for muscle hypertrophy. What we're looking at here is how much weight can we actually push? How much contractile force does the muscle use for a certain movement? So think about a power lifter here, not a bodybuilder, where they have symmetry and that kind of thing. Here, we're just talking about how much weight can you push in any one period of time. How would you periodize that? Well, look right there. Okay. Our duration, our mesocycle is still 3 to 4 weeks. But now look at the volume. Now we've dropped our reps way down from 15 to 12 to 8, now down to 5. Holy moly. Only 5 times I have to do that exercise per set. That's pretty cool. Oh, and you're telling me that I can rest 2 to 3 minutes in between. That's kind of cool. Hopefully I can check all my social media pages. But now look at the intensity. We're starting to get up to our true 1 RM, our true 1 repetition maximum. So for the weight that we're lifting for each set, we're kind of maxing out on all the amount that we can lift. All right. So again, I want you to kind of see what's happening here. All right. I want you to see that certain things are increasing, certain things are decreasing. If you can understand that conceptually, visually, that's periodization. Periodization is we can change these different things within certain periods of times that we call cycles. All right. And by changing these different variables over time, we're keeping our brain and our muscles revitalized, fresh, challenged. Okay. But we're building in active rest. All right. I think that's pretty much it in terms of the presentation. This was just some kind of closing questions I had for you guys. And it's just if people kind of want to share onto the chat thread after the presentation is over, then on kind of best practices and things that have kind of worked for you. I could go on all night. The wife would kind of look at me sideways, but I could go on all night with this. I mean, again, the nerd in me, right? I'm an academician. I'm kind of nerdy. The nerd in me very much looked at how my training as a scientific approach. Okay. Because if I just go into a gym and I push weights around, yeah, I'm probably not going to get the results I want. But if I can apply some principles to it and I can structure it a certain way and I can track my progress a certain way, all of a sudden it gives my brain something to chew on, something new and fresh to consider and to manipulate, which keeps my brain engaged. And by using the principle of progression to ask more of my body through certain phases and less of it at other phases, that's going to keep me kind of physiologically charged for a longer period of time. I would argue if you can follow this, and again, I'll talk about it more specifically in the next couple presentations of, well, how can you periodize an aerobic training regimen? So I'm a jogger, I'm a swimmer. What does that look like to periodize that? Or the next one looks a little bit more at specifically strength training. And I'll talk a little bit more about the application of periodization within that concept. All right. So if you're kind of intrigued at one of those other 2 realms of exercise and how this might shake out and how it might look for you, I would highly encourage you to think about attending the next one. I think we have one next Monday, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe this upcoming Monday, or is it next? I have to kind of check with Melissa on that one, but I think it's actually
the 5th
the 5th.
at
Cool.
7 p.m. and the link is in the chat box.
Great.
And
All
that
right.
is the basics of strength. That's your strength training.
Absolutely. All right. So the idea there is, again, this is just one of these basic foundations. That's what I've tried to do with this colloquium series. If you guys attended the first one, I'm trying to just build on certain knowledge structures. And I'm saying, okay, let's examine exercise and health science from the fitness perspective, but let's start at the basic level and let's slowly kind of build as a group that follows and goes through this. And my objective by the time we're done is that we'll have all this knowledge and we will be able to kind of put that knowledge to practice and design the best program for us. Okay, so I want to thank you guys for attending. I'm going to hang out in the chat space here for just a couple minutes if you have any questions. I hope I see you guys on the 5th. We're just going to kind of break it down just a little bit more. All right, so that should be fun. I'll go ahead and get caught up on the chats, but I want to thank everybody for attending and I hope to see you guys next time.